after a word is power. I first saw that quote about 3 years ago, hung up on a wall behind the cook's cashier at a local bookstore. I was in the middle of purchasing some Christmas gifts for my kids, and as I was waiting for the cashier to check in my items, I looked up on the wall behind her and I saw it. I immediately started nodding my head up and down, silently whispering to myself, yes, that is it. That is going to be the last line of my book. At the time, you see, I was on a mission. I had gone through more than my fair share of adversity, and life had kicked me down more than I could care to count. And throughout those years of adversity, I remember saying to myself, I need to put that in my book. And then a little while later, something else would happen, and I'd be like, I definitely need to put that in my book. And then as the years went by, I found myself saying that same phrase over and over, almost to the point of embarrassment, because, well, I should have written a book by now, right? But no, there was no book anywhere in sight. Until one day, I just started doing it. I started to write. One thing about me is that I am notorious for starting something and not finishing it. I mean, one time, I had this idea that I was going to learn how to play golf. I went out and I bought a couple of outfits, complete with the visors and those cute skirts. And I figured if I at least looked the part, then that would be half of the battle. I signed up for some beginner lessons and I showed up for the lessons. I took the lessons, but then I just stopped. Needless to say, you won't find me on any given day on the golf course, not in any serious competition at least. How many of us are guilty of buying musical instruments and not learning how to play them? Or how about that exercise equipment sitting in our basement collecting dust? I know I can't be the only one guilty of this. Do you know what I call those? I call those good intentions. I mean, didn't we have all kinds of good intentions when we walked into the music store and walked out with that full set of professional drums? Or bargained with some guy on Marketplace for that acoustic guitar? We had all kinds of plans to fit into those pants from 10 years ago. When we bought that treadmill that hasn't seen a kilometer since we first bought it, after the novelty wore off, after the first couple of weeks. And by the way, I call those pants my motivation pants. How many of you have your very own pair of motivation pants that you're still waiting to get back into? What's holding us back? I feel like there should be a simple answer to that question, and there is. The answer is to stop overthinking and just do it. If you want something bad enough, you will stop finding excuses and you will just do it. Going back to the topic of music for a moment, I've been wanting to play the piano since I was a little girl. I've had 45 years to learn. Somehow or another, all of these years later, I have not learned to play the piano. And who do I have to blame for that? I can't blame it on my parents. Can't blame it on my kids or my job. Can't blame it on time. Little kids learn to play the piano as little as 3, 4, 5 years old. So why haven't I learned yet? The only person I can truly blame is myself. I have not taken the time to sit down and practice. I have not taken the time to dedicate a little bit of myself each day to attempt to learn. I have not practiced the art of repetition that is required to learn. I failed to learn because I failed to try. But it doesn't have to be that way. The first step to learning something new is to, first of all, believe in yourself. And to know that you don't have to be good at something the first time that you do it. In fact, there's a very good chance that you're not going to be great at something that you're in the process of learning to do. Greatness takes time, it takes patience, and it takes faith in the knowledge that you can do anything that you set your mind to do. So here I was. I had just finished the first chapter of my book. Knowing myself and my track record for starting things and not finishing them, it should have ended right there. One lonely chapter and nothing else to accompany it. As if it wasn't embarrassing enough to talk about writing this book, only to start writing it and have it end after the first 15 pages. No build-up, no character development, no storyline, no conflict, no resolution. Bestseller for sure. But there was something different this time about my willingness to pursue this task to the end. I was driven by passion, a purpose. I had my eye on the ball, and there was no way that I was taking my eye off of it. I had something important to say, and I knew that the only way that I could do that was to tell my story. I had to push all fears of failure and the possibility of failure aside. I had a vision of what the book would represent. It would be my story, yes, but it would be so many other people's stories as well. And through telling my story, I would also be telling theirs. I was on a mission for justice, to right the wrongs, and to pave the way for others following in my footsteps. One thing I have learned these past few years is that when something bad happens to us, it's like we have this built-in ship directing us to correct it so that others following in our footsteps will not have to endure the same misfortunes that we have experienced. If the system is flawed and we have experienced those flaws and we know exactly where the flaws are, then why not point them out to the people who are in a position of power to fix them? To me, that's just common sense. Problems don't get fixed if we stay silent. But sometimes, telling our stories is hard. Speaking up is hard. And there may be a fear that our voice will crack and the words won't come out the way you intended. There may be a fear of being judged. I have been judged. But for every time that I have had someone say something negative, I find comfort in knowing that there are 100 more people standing beside me with something positive to say. I brush off the naysayers, I keep my eye on the ball, and I push forward. If we turn our ear to the negative, we're not going to get very far. So far on my journey, I've been called sexist. I've been accused of being prejudiced against men. And to that, I politely walk away from the conversation. I recognize that not everyone will see what I see, and that's okay. Everyone is entitled to his or her own opinion, but the important thing that I've learned to hold on to is that it's okay. I don't let anyone else's opinion of me get in the way of what I believe in. Not everyone will agree with what you stand for, which is why you need to believe in yourself more than ever when you make that decision to stand up and be loud. Don't let anyone hijack your vibe. If you have something important to say it. Speak up. Be loud. We're only going this way once, so make your mark and do good. I believe it is important to strive to leave the world a little better place than when we first entered it. How many of you believe that you're the same person that you were 10 years ago? How about 20 years ago? I'm willing to bet that the majority of you will say that no, You're not the same person that you were all those years ago. It's not so much time alone that changes us, but the experiences that we go through during a period of time that shapes us and redefines us. We learn to find our own 2 feet and walk our own path. We learn that our path does not necessarily look like someone else's. We learn as we get older and a little wiser that there is depth in the saying, carpe diem, or seize the day. That it is better to act now and make mistakes along the way than it is to do nothing and have to live with the regret of what could have been. Thomas Edison, as you know, as a man who invented the light bulb, he famously quoted, "I have not failed 10,000 times. I've simply found 10,000 ways that will not work." Alexander Graham Bell, who we all know brought us the telephone, he quoted, "When one door closes, another one will open. But we often look so long and so regretfully at the closed door that we fail to see the one that is open before us." Henry Ford, he's quoted, the only real mistake is the one from which we learn nothing. And that failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, except this time more intelligently. And I got one more. Walt Disney once said, "If you can dream it, you can do it." These examples of outstanding humans in history who have defied the odds because they did not give up in the face of adversity. They did not give in when the odds of winning and achieving their goals were stacked against them. When the world said it was impossible, they said it was possible. If we choose to adopt the mindset of these individuals, we too can achieve anything we set our minds to do. And part of creating those ideas and goals in our minds depends heavily on how we talk to ourselves. If we talk negatively to ourselves, that we can't do it because we're not smart enough, or we don't have the money or the resources to do it, then we're probably not going to be very successful, are we? On the contrary, if we feed our minds with positive thoughts, we're probably more likely to succeed. Positive thoughts bring positive results. Now, I want to talk about women and equality. For as far as we have come, we still have a long ways to go. As a child, I didn't feel as though I had any less rights than a boy. It wasn't until I was much older that I slowly began to recognize the inconsistencies in what we have been led to believe, that we live in an equal society. And in fact, we don't. The gender pay gap is real. Gender-based poverty is real. Gender-based violence is also real. And all of these categories place women at a severe disadvantage. It is for these reasons that it is important that we continue to speak up against the injustices, that we continue to rattle the cage, and that we continue to advocate for change. What if Rosa Parks didn't give up her seat? What if Margaret Thatcher didn't run for Prime Minister? What if Anne Frank didn't write in her diary? What if Ruth Bader Ginsburg chose not to pursue a career in law? And what if Amelia Earhart didn't take that flight? These are just a handful of the many women in history who have helped change the world by using their voices and actions to defy the odds. They stood up when they were told to sit down. They spoke up when they were told to remain silent. It takes an incredible amount of strength and courage to go against the current, and not everyone is up for that challenge. I'm not saying that not everyone is capable of creating change and standing up for what they believe in, because we all heavy enough to do. What I am saying is that not everyone understands that half of the battle is in our minds. If we want to do something, we first of all have to believe that we can do it. If we have no faith in ourselves that we can accomplish whatever it is that we've set out in our minds to do, then that is as far as it will go. Secondly, you have to want it bad enough to actually go out and get it. The saying, you can do anything you put your mind to do, that's been around for centuries. But there's an undeniable truth to it. If you want to lose 20 pounds, and you have this vision in your mind that you want to lose 20 pounds, but you're not willing to put in the work required to achieve your goal, do you think that you're going to lose 20 pounds? Do you think you're going to lose 20 pounds by sitting in front of the TV, elbow deep in a bag of potato chips? Or do you think that perhaps you'll have a better chance of reaching your goal by spending an hour each day at the gym? The point I'm trying to make is that action equals results, and inaction equals no results. If you expect to see change, you need to take action. We need to take action. That goes for the simpler things in life, like our appearances and personal aspirations, to the more complex challenges, such as the fight for human rights and equality. The common denominator between the simpler and the complex is that they both require some form of change in patterns of behavior. We are not going to see the gender pay gap close on its own. We are not going to see gender-based violence get better on its own. We are not going to raise women out of poverty or tear down the barriers that young girls face by remaining silent. We need advocates to raise awareness and encourage the initiation of change. And we can all do this by using our voices to be so loud that they won't be able to ignore us. The beauty and the power of a voice is that there is no age restriction on when we are allowed to use it. We need to teach our children at a young age that it is our right to speak up when we feel something isn't right. And likewise, you can go your whole life and sit quietly in the background waiting for someone else to do the talking. But just because that's what you're used to and that's what you're comfortable with, it doesn't mean it's too late to start. A decade ago, I was a newly separated, single mom of 3 small children. I was barely making ends meet. I would come home from work one day after a stressful day through rush hour traffic to pick up my kids from daycare before the late fees kick in, and I'm sure some of you can relate. Only to realize that the lights were on all of the houses on my street. Mine was off. My electricity was cut for perhaps the 5th time over the course of a few months. I would come home any other random day, and there'd be no heat or stove to cook on because my gas was cut. My house would eventually become repossessed by the bank, and while I was stalling the impending foreclosure of the house, I was at the same time fending off the repo man who was knocking at my door any given supper hour looking for the whereabouts of the minivan, to which I calmly replied, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't know where it is." But I was lying through my teeth. I needed that van to get to my job, and if I allowed him to repossess it, I would not have a means to get to and from my job. So, I hid the van up the street in a friend's driveway until I worked my way to a better position financially, that I no longer required to hide the van from predators threatening to take it. Food was scarce, and I admit at that time, I had too much pride to ask for help and handouts. Life wasn't supposed to look like this. I compared my life to others, which in hindsight is by far the worst thing I could have done. None of us know what's going on behind someone else's closed doors. Number two, my life is not someone else's, and their lives are not mine. When I was going through all of that adversity, I couldn't see past the end of the day. I couldn't see that every morning I stepped out of bed and put my feet on the floor. I was one step closer to being okay. One thing about storms is that when you're going through them, you can't see where the storm ends. You just sail through it, you just sail through it, until one day the rain will stop, the clouds will part, and the sun will come out. And there might even be a rainbow on the horizon. And if we want to get really creative, there might be a palm tree and a sandy beach for effect. So what's the takeaway from all of that? As sure as it is bound to rain, the sun is never far behind. And I'm going to say that again because I think it's important to remember. As sure as it is bound to rain, the sun is never far behind. How many of you have been there? How many of you are still there? For those of you who are still there, I want to tell you to never give up. Life ebbs and flows. It's constantly changing from one day to the next. When things are going good, I hate to say it, but it's not always going to go good. But on the contrary, when things are going badly, they're not always going to stay bad. If you ever find yourself in the middle of a storm, rowing your little boat, and I hope and pray you never find yourself in that kind of situation. But just in case you do, I want to remind you to never stop rowing. One day, I was at work, sitting at my desk, and a random stranger said to me, "One day, people are going to know who you are." I looked down at the worn down metal on the bottom of my boots. I didn't have a penny to my name. I was struggling to keep my head above water. And out of the blue, with nothing to support his statement, this man tells me, people are going to know who I am. And now that you have a little overview of the gravity of my situation at that time, just to recap. My house was in the middle of being repossessed. My vehicle was in the middle of being repossessed. I had no heat, no electricity, and 3 small children. Feed, shelter, and support. And that somehow, people are going to know who I am, according to the stranger standing in front of me. I'm willing to bet that, aside from a few family and friends here in the audience today, none of you know who I am. And that's probably because I'm relatively new to this whole speaking up thing. And I'm grateful to the organizers of this event to give me the opportunity to speak today. 10 years ago, you had to tell me that I would be standing on this stage, speaking up against the injustices that women and children face. I would have thought you were crazy. I mean, little old me. I just know about it. Who's going to listen to what I have to say? See, that's not true. I look back at the old me from 10 years ago. First of all, once again, I was too busy trying to survive to be able to fight any other battle than the one that was facing me from the day to day on a personal level. I was not in a position to fight for other women and children who were going through the same thing that my children and I were going through. Simply because I too was struggling to keep my own head above water. How could I possibly help anyone else when I couldn't even help myself? I had to put my own oxygen mask on first before I could help anyone else. So now, with my oxygen mask on securely in place for over 3 years now. I have been actively seeking justice and using my voice through the power of words. And let me tell you, there is absolute power in words. And this false belief that I once had, just because I'm one person, that I am not capable of creating change, I don't believe that anymore. And part of me is angry with myself for allowing that negative self-talk to creep in. Our worst enemy is oftentimes ourselves. If you don't practice it, then perhaps today you start. Today is the day you start. Start telling yourself that you can do it. Start telling yourself that you are capable. Start telling yourself that you are beautiful, that you are smart, and that you were born with a purpose. So I've asked myself, what's my purpose? Well, it came to me after years of being beaten down and beaten down and beaten down some more, before I decided this one time, enough is enough. This time, when I get up, everyone is going to hear me when I get up. The thing about injustice is that if any of you have ever experienced it, it feels like a punch in the gut after you've already been punched in the gut. It stirs a fire in you to see justice served and to make things right so that others following in your footsteps will never have to experience what you have experienced. Laws are not set in stone. They can be changed. And while it takes a village to make that happen, it only takes one voice to start the conversation. So how do we use that voice? I can tell you some of the ways that I am using mine. As I mentioned earlier, I wrote our journey as a military family and the struggles that we've encountered with the system as a military family into a book that I published last fall titled Unarmored, PTSD Affects Us All. I wrote that book mainly for our government to read, our policymakers, in hopes that it will fall into the right person's hands who will see where the issues are so they can work on solutions to fix them. I've been using my voice through petitions that I've been working on with other former military spouses who have also experienced similar issues that our family have experienced. I have engaged our members of parliament to raise awareness on the issues at hand. And some of those issues include financial abuse, barriers to access to justice, intimate partner violence, post-separation abuse, and the lack of support for military families during the post-separation time frame. I've been actively raising awareness on these issues on social media platforms, and recently I began calling into open line radio stations to discuss these issues to help put them in the spotlight. I'm constantly looking for new ways to be heard. And being here today is another example of how I'm using my voice to do just that. Throughout this process, I've learned that once you become passionate about something, there is nothing that can stop you from reaching your destination. You adopt the absolute mindset that where there's a will, you will find a way. You don't quit because it's hard. Nothing worthwhile is achieved because it was easy. And sometimes you have to go through that storm that we talked about a little earlier in order for you to realize things about yourself that you never ever knew. When we come out on the other side, we realize we are no longer the same person we were before the storm began. We realize our worth. We embrace our strength. We recognize who's in our corner and who is just waiting for us to fall. We learn to adjust our sail accordingly and acknowledge that we are in the driver's seat. We decide who gets to come along for the ride and who to let off at the next port. Throughout the storm, we learn not only about our own strengths and weaknesses, but also We become master observers of the behaviors of others around us. It's when you hit rock bottom that you find out who your true friends are, who's for you and who's against you. And that's a good thing, because you want to surround yourself with positive people who love to see you succeed, who want to help raise you up. God knows we can all use a little positive boost every now and then. So, find those friends and family and support systems and hold them close. Let them know you appreciate them. Find joy in the little things every single day. And know your worth. Know your strength. Find your voice. Learn to use your voice. And know that there is no such thing as being too loud. Thank you.